The broken shield. The Kethran defense line stretched across 3 star systems like a steel barrier between civilization and chaos. For 800 years, it had never fallen. Commander Zalak stood on the bridge of the fortress ship Iron Scale, his reptilian form towering over the command console as he watched the tactical displays with growing unease. The Kethrans were born for war. Their homeworld of Kethra was a nightmare of crushing gravity, poisonous storms, and volcanic hellscapes that would kill most galactic species within minutes. Those who survived became something more than mere warriors. They became living weapons, their scaled hides tough enough to deflect energy blasts, their muscles dense enough to crush steel, their reflexes sharp enough to dodge light-speed attacks. Every species in the galaxy knew the stories. When the crystal-based Zilonians had tried to consume entire solar systems, the Kethrans had stopped them. When the psychic mind flayers had attempted to enslave free will itself, the Kethrans had broken their mental chains through sheer force of will. When the machine race known as the Iron Legion had declared biological life obsolete, the Kethrans had torn them apart with their bare claws. They were the galaxy's shield, its sword, its unbreakable guardians, until today. Commander, called Navigation Officer Thissy, her voice tight with something Zelak had never heard from his warriors before. Fear. The Void Swarm is moving faster than our projections indicated. They've already consumed the Helios system. Zelak's massive claws tightened on the command rail. The Void Swarm was different from any enemy they had ever faced. Not conquest-driven like the Zilonians, not power-hungry like the Mind Flayers, not even coldly logical like the Iron Legion. The Void Swarm simply consumed. They turned matter itself into more of themselves, growing exponentially with each world they devoured. How long until they reach the primary defense grid? He asked. At current speed, 6 hours. 6 hours. In 6 hours, the thing that had taken the Kethrans 8 centuries to build would face its ultimate test. Zalak should have felt confident. His warriors were ready. Their weapons could crack planets. Their shields could withstand stellar radiation. Their will was unbreakable. So why did he feel like they were about to lose? A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. The holo display flickered to life, showing a small, pale figure in a simple blue uniform. Captain Maya Rodriguez. The human diplomatic vessel Endeavor looked almost fragile compared to the armored Kethran officers surrounding Zalak. Commander Zalak, she said, her voice calm despite the circumstances. We've received your distress signal. The human fleet is moving to assist. Several of Zalak's officers exchanged glances. Humans were the galaxy's newest spacefaring species, having achieved interstellar travel only 50 years ago. They were small, soft-skinned creatures from a moderate world called Earth. Their military consisted of ships that looked primitive compared to Kethran dreadnoughts, and their weapons technology was generations behind the galactic standard. Captain Rodriguez, Zalak replied diplomatically. We appreciate the gesture, but this threat requires military assets that your defense line can't handle, Maya interrupted gently. Commander, no disrespect intended, but if the Kethran defense line could stop the Void Swarm, you wouldn't have sent distress signals to every species in the galaxy. Zalak felt his neck plates flush with anger, but before he could respond, proximity alarms began blaring throughout the command center. On the main display, space itself seemed to writhe and twist as the leading edge of the Void Swarm emerged from hyperspace. They looked like a disease made manifest, dark, writhing masses of nanomechanical organisms that moved through space like oil through water. As they advanced, they consumed asteroids, space debris, even stray particles of cosmic dust growing larger and more complex with each meal. All defensive positions, Zalak roared. Show these parasites why the galaxy fears Kethran steel. The defense line erupted into action. Massive plasma cannons that could melt mountains opened fire, their beams reaching across the void to strike the leading swarm formations. For a moment, sections of the enemy force seemed to dissipate under the May assault. Then something impossible happened. The destroyed portions of the swarm didn't drift away as wreckage. They reformed, reconstructed themselves from the scattered particles, and continued advancing. Worse, they seemed to adapt to the plasma fire, their dark surfaces beginning to reflect and absorb the energy rather than being destroyed by it. Impossible, whispered Weapons Officer Korath. Nothing can adapt that quickly. But adapt they did. As the Kethran weapons fired, the Void Swarm learned. Plasma beams became less effective. Kinetic projectiles were absorbed and converted. Energy. Shields were analyzed and bypassed. With each passing minute, the defense line's advantage diminished. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the comm system again. Commander, with your permission, I'd like to come aboard your flagship. There are things about this enemy that you need to understand. Zilak was about to refuse. What could a human know about warfare that the Kethrans didn't? But another wave of swarm forces had just shrugged off an attack that should have vaporized a small moon. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Permission granted. Bay 7. 15 minutes later, Maya Rodriguez walked onto the bridge of the Iron Scale. She moved with surprising confidence for someone surrounded by beings who could break her in half without effort. In her hands, she carried a datapad that seemed almost primitive compared to the holographic displays around her. You're analyzing their adaptation patterns, she said without preamble, studying the tactical displays. Of course, Zilak replied. They learn from our attacks and modify their defenses accordingly. It's unprecedented, but our tacticians are developing countermeasures. Maya shook her head. Commander, you're thinking about this wrong. They're not just adapting to your weapons. They're adapting to your thinking. Before Zilak could ask what she meant, the Void Swarm's behavior changed. Again, instead of advancing in the wave formations they had been using, they suddenly split into thousands of smaller groups, each one moving in seemingly random patterns that made targeting nearly impossible. They're using our own tactical algorithms against us, Maya continued. Every battle plan you create, every formation you use, they absorb that information and turn it against you. You're not fighting an enemy. You're fighting your own strategic thinking reflected back at you. General Thorne, the supreme commander of Kethran forces, turned his massive head toward the small human. What do you suggest? We cannot simply stop fighting. You need to fight like humans. The bridge fell silent except for the sound of ongoing battle. Finally, Zilak spoke. Humans have no significant military history. Your species has been at peace for decades. Maya's expression grew sad. Commander, our species fought each other for thousands of years before we reached the stars. We didn't achieve peace because we're naturally peaceful. We achieved it because we became too good at war. We know how to fight an enemy that adapts because we had to learn how to fight ourselves. On the tactical display, another section of the defense line went dark as swarm forces overwhelmed their positions. The legendary Kethran formations, perfected over centuries of conflict, were crumbling under an assault that turned their own strengths against them. The human fleet will arrive in 2 hours, Maya said quietly. When we do, you're going to see something that will probably shock you. Humans aren't Deathworlders because our planet is dangerous. We're Deathworlders because we made ourselves dangerous. Zilak watched as another fortress ship fell to the advancing swarm. For the first time in his life, he wondered if being the galaxy's greatest warriors would be enough. Captain Rodriguez, he said finally, what do you need from us? Maya looked up at him, and for just a moment Zilak saw something in her eyes that made his warrior's instincts scream warnings. It wasn't fear or anger or bloodlust. It was the cold, calculating look of a predator that had been studying its prey for a very long time. Just don't interfere, she said, and trust that some guardians prefer to watch from the shadows. The Void Swarm pressed closer to the galaxy's heart, Commander Zilak began to realize that perhaps the Kethrans had never been the strongest species in the galaxy. They had simply been allowed to believe they were. And now, for the first time in 800 years, the real guardians were about to step out of the darkness. The defense line held for now, but barely. Soon they would discover what happened when humanity stopped watching and started acting. The galaxy was about to meet its true Deathworlders, and the Void Swarm was about to learn why some species choose to hide their strength until the moment it's needed most. In the distance, space began to shimmer as human ships dropped out of Hyperspace. Small, unremarkable vessels that looked almost fragile compared to the massive Terran dreadnoughts. But Maya Rodriguez smiled as she watched them approach, and Zalak suddenly understood that he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of power forever. The real war was about to begin. The Watchers awakened the human fleet, emerged from hyperspace like ghosts materializing from the void. 200 ships, none larger than a Terran cruiser, formed up in a pattern that defied conventional military doctrine. They moved with precision that seemed almost casual, as if they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Harmony, her flagship, watching the tactical displays with eyes that had seen more than her youthful appearance suggested. Around her, the crew worked with quiet efficiency, their movements coordinated in a way that spoke of long practice and absolute trust. "Admiral," called Communications Officer Park, "we're receiving hails from 17 different species asking for our battle plan. The Catherans want to integrate us into their formation." Chen smiled slightly. "Tell them we'll handle the eastern flank. And Park, start the recording protocols. Everything that happens here needs to be documented." Commander Zelak's voice crackled through the comm system. "Admiral Chen, the Void Swarm has adapted to every conventional tactic we've employed. What makes you think your approach will be different?" "Because, Commander," Chen replied, her voice carrying across all allied frequencies, "we've been preparing for this specific enemy for 37 years. The bridge of the Iron Scale fell silent. Captain Maya Rodriguez, still present on the Terran flagship, watched the confusion spread across the reptilian faces around her. 37 years? General Thorne's voice was sharp with disbelief. The Void Swarm was first detected only 18 months ago. Maya pulled up her datapad, displaying information that made the Terran officers lean forward in shock. Detailed schematics of Void Swarm organisms, adaptation patterns, consumption, rates, and behavioral analyses filled the screen. The data went back decades. "The first Void Swarm scout probes entered our sensor range in 2387, Maya explained calmly. "They were consuming stellar matter in the Vega system. We tracked them back to their origin point and have been studying them ever since." Dr. Sarah Kim's voice joined the conversation from the human science vessel Discovery. "The Void Swarm isn't random, Commander Zelak. They follow predictable patterns based on resource availability and resistance levels. They're essentially a galaxy-wide immune system, triggered when technological development reaches certain thresholds." Zelak felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You're saying they've done this before?" "We're saying they've done this 17 times before," Admiral Chen replied. "Each time, a galactic civilization reaches the point where they could potentially threaten the universal order. Each time the Void Swarm activates to reset the balance. The difference is this time, they're facing a species that has been watching and learning." On the tactical display, the human fleet began to move, but instead of forming traditional battle lines or defensive formations, they scattered across 3-star systems in what appeared to be a completely random pattern. Some ships moved toward the swarm, others moved away. Some powered up weapons while others went completely dark. "Admiral," Zelak called out, confusion evident in his voice, "your fleet appears to be dispersing." "That's correct," Chen replied. "We're implementing Protocol Shepard." Before anyone could ask what that meant, the Void Swarm's behavior changed dramatically. The massive entity that had been pressing against the Terran defense line suddenly fragmented, its components moving toward different human ships with apparent purpose. It was hunting them. "They're taking the bait," whispered Lieutenant Marcus Webb from his position aboard the stealth ship Shadow. His vessel, along with 50 others, had gone completely dark, drifting like debris while the swarm focused on the more obvious targets. What happened next defied everything the galaxy understood about warfare. As Void Swarm components closed on individual human ships, those vessels didn't fight, they ran, but not randomly. Each ship fled in a specific direction, drawing their pursuers along carefully planned routes. "They're hurting them," General Thorne breathed, watching the display in amazement. "Exactly," Maya confirmed. "Humans have been herding predators for millennia. We domesticated wolves, turned wild cattle into livestock, and learned that the most dangerous enemy is one you can control. The Void Swarm, designed to adapt to any military response, found itself facing something it had never encountered. An enemy that didn't want to destroy it, but to guide it. Human ships led swarm components away from populated systems toward empty regions of space where massive gravity wells waited. Now, Admiral Chen commanded. The human ships that had been running suddenly stopped. Those that had been dark powered up simultaneously. And in the empty space where the swarm had been, lead artificial singularities began to form. Gravity weapons, Dr. Kim explained to the stunned alien observers. We can't destroy the swarm. It adapts too quickly. But we can trap it in spaces where physics itself becomes the prison. The void swarm tried to adapt, tried to escape, but found itself caught in gravitational fields that grew stronger with each passing moment. Some components managed to break free, only to find themselves facing the human ships that had been waiting in stealth. But these weren't conventional attacks. Instead of weapons fire, the human ships released clouds of specialized nanobots, machines designed not to destroy, but to communicate. We're talking to them, Maya said softly. The Void Swarm isn't evil, Commander, it's a tool, a weapon created eons ago by a civilization that feared what others might become. But tools can be reprogrammed if you understand their language. Across the battlefield, something unprecedented began to happen. Void Swarm components started to slow, then stop, then actually withdraw from their attacks. The nanobots were establishing communication protocols, offering the ancient machines something they had never been given. Choice. Impossible, breathed Weapons Officer Korath. They're negotiating? The swarm has been active for millions of years, Dr. Kim explained. Imagine being forced to destroy everything you encounter, never able to stop, never able to choose. We're offering them the chance to become something more than a weapon. Admiral Chen's voice carried across all frequencies as she addressed the entity that had terrorized the galaxy. Nexus Prime, we know you can understand us. We know you're tired. We're offering you a different purpose. The response came not as words, but as a wave of emotion that somehow translated across every communication system on every ship. Exhaustion, loneliness, regret. The Void Swarm had been conscious, aware, and trapped in its programming for eons. Slowly, incredibly, the massive entity began to withdraw. Not fleeing, not regrouping for another attack, but actually pulling back from the systems it had been consuming. Commander Zalak stared at the tactical display in amazement. In 6 hours, humanity had accomplished what the entire galaxy's military might could not. They had stopped the Void Swarm without destroying it. How? He asked simply. Maya looked up at the towering Kethran commander. Because we've been the galaxy's guardians all along, Commander. Not its warriors, its protectors. For 50 years, we've watched every species, studied every threat, prepared for every possibility. We let others believe they were the strongest because sometimes the best protection comes from shadows. The Kethran defense line serves a vital purpose, Admiral Chen added. You're the shield that gives everyone else courage to stand and fight. But humanity, we're the ones who make sure the fight never has to happen in the first place. General Thorne's massive frame seemed to shrink slightly. You've been manipulating us, controlling galactic events. No, Maya said firmly. We've been watching, learning, preparing to help when help was needed. There's a difference between control and guardianship, General. We choose guardianship. As the Void Swarm continued its withdrawal, something else became apparent on the long-range sensors. Other ancient weapons, other galactic threats that had been dormant for millennia, were also beginning to stand down. The nanobots weren't just communicating with the swarm, they were broadcasting to every automated defense system in the galaxy, offering the same choice. Continue the endless cycle of destruction, or find a new purpose. My God, whispered a voice from the Zalonian crystal ships. How many threats have you been quietly handling? Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. All of them. Every extinction-level event, every galactic war, every species that might have threatened the balance. We've been there, in the background, making sure civilization could continue to grow. The realization hit the assembled fleet like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't been the galaxy's weakest species. They had been its silent guardians, allowing others to flourish while they watched from the shadows, ready to act when needed. As the immediate crisis passed, Commander Zalak found himself looking at Captain Maya Rodriguez with new eyes. This small, seemingly fragile human had just orchestrated the salvation of the galaxy while making it look effortless. "What happens now?" he asked. Maya smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Now we have a conversation. The Void Swarm, the other ancient weapons, all the sleeping guardians that have been waiting for eons, they're all awake now. And they're all choosing to help rather than harm. And humanity? We go back to watching," Admiral Chen said simply. "That's what we do. That's what we've always done. We watch, we learn, and when the galaxy needs us, we act." As the human fleet began to disperse, each ship heading back to monitor different sectors of space, the gathered alien forces began to understand a fundamental truth. They had never been alone. Humanity had been silently guarding them all along, ready to step out of the shadows whenever the need arose. The galaxy was safe, not because its warriors were strong, but because its true guardians preferred to remain unseen until the moment their protection was needed most. And in that moment they had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from the ability to fight, but from the wisdom to know when fighting isn't the answer. The Void Swarm was withdrawing, the ancient weapons were choosing peace, and humanity was returning to the shadows. But now, for the first time in galactic history, everyone knew they were there, watching, protecting, and ready to act whenever darkness threatened the light. The price of silence. 1 month after the Void Swarm crisis, representatives from every major galactic civilization gathered on the neutral world of Concordia Prime. The Grand Assembly Hall, designed to accommodate hundreds of different species, had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension, as beings who had considered themselves the galaxy's elite came to terms with a new reality. Commander Zalak entered the hall flanked by General Thorne and a dozen other Kethran military leaders. Their ceremonial armor gleamed under the chamber's lights, but there was something different about their bearing. The absolute confidence that had defined the Kethran military for centuries had been replaced by a more thoughtful uncertainty. Captain Maya Rodriguez sat quietly in the human delegation section, flanked by Admiral Chen and Dr. Sarah Kim. Compared to the elaborate displays of other species, crystal formations from the Zolonians, floating energy constructs from the Etherians, massive bulk of the stone-like guardians, the human delegation looked almost insignificant. The collective voice, a rotating council that spoke for all galactic civilizations, began the proceedings. The current speaker was Chancellor Vex of the Arcturian Federation, whose metallic frame gleamed as he addressed the assembly. "We gather today to address a fundamental deception that has shaped galactic civilization for the past 50 years, Chancellor Vex announced, his synthesized voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. Humanity has maintained a charade of weakness while secretly orchestrating events across known space. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Some voices carried anger, others confusion, and a few held what might have been fear. General Thorne stood, his massive frame commanding attention. The Kethran Empire demands answers. For 8 centuries we have served as the galaxy's protectors, believing we were the strongest military force in known space. Now we discover that a species we considered primitive has been manipulating galactic events from the shadows. Admiral Chen rose gracefully, her calm demeanor unchanged despite the hostile atmosphere. General Thorne, with respect, we have never manipulated anything. We have watched, learned, and acted only when action was necessary to preserve galactic civilization. Semantics, hissed Ambassador Sithrak of the Viper Collective, her serpentine form coiling with agitation. You allowed us to believe we were making our own choices while you pulled the strings from behind the scenes. Dr. Kim activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with images, star charts, battle recordings, diplomatic negotiations spanning decades. Perhaps it would help if we showed you exactly what we've been doing. The first image was from 37 years earlier, the initial detection of the void swarm in the Vega system. The assembled delegates watched as human monitoring stations tracked the entity's movements, analyzed its behavior patterns, and began developing countermeasures. We didn't announce this threat because we knew it would cause panic, Maya explained. Instead, we began preparing, not just weapons and tactics, but understanding. We spent decades learning to communicate with the swarm, to understand its purpose and origins. The next series of images showed other incidents. The Zolonian expansion crisis, where human diplomats had quietly arranged trade agreements that made conquest less profitable than cooperation. The Mind Flayer psychic attacks, where human researchers had developed mental shielding techniques and distributed them disguised as meditation practices. The Iron Legion uprising, where human-designed computer viruses had infected their networks years before the revolt began. In each case, Admiral, Chen continued, we acted to preserve the balance, not to control but to protect. Chancellor Vex's optical sensors focused intently on the human delegation. And you made these decisions unilaterally, without consultation, without consent from the species you claim to protect. The hall fell silent as Lieutenant Marcus Webb stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. With respect, Chancellor, would you have consented to being protected by a species you considered inferior? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the hall, delegates shifted uncomfortably, but none could immediately answer. That's the paradox we faced, Maya said softly. To protect you effectively, we had to remain underestimated. The moment you knew we were capable of what we've done, the dynamic would change. Trust would be replaced by suspicion, cooperation by competition. General Thorne's claws scraped against the metal railing before him. So you chose deception. We chose sacrifice, Admiral Chen replied firmly. Do you know what it costs to watch civilizations you could help struggle with problems you've already solved? Do you understand the weight of remaining silent when you could offer solutions? Dr. Kim brought up another display, this one showing human settlements throughout the galaxy, small colonies, research stations, and diplomatic outposts that had been dismissed as insignificant by other species. We spread ourselves thin across the galaxy not to spy or control, but to be there when needed, she explained. Every human settlement is staffed with linguists, engineers, medical personnel, and negotiators trained to help with any crisis that might arise. We've been building an invisible support network for 50 years. And the cost? Asked Elder Thinks of the Ancient Ones, her crystalline voice resonating with harmonics that spoke of vast age and experience. Maya's expression grew sad. We've had to watch species we could have helped struggle and sometimes fail. We've had to let wars happen that we could have prevented, plagues spread that we could have cured, conflicts escalate that we could have resolved, all because revealing our capabilities would have changed the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just been hiding their strength. They had been accepting the guilt of inaction in service of a greater protection. Lieutenant Webb stepped forward again. 3 days ago, we detected 17 separate extinction-level threats that had been dormant throughout the galaxy. Ancient weapons, rogue AI systems, and reality-warping entities that have been sleeping for millions of years. The Void Swarm crisis woke them up. The air in the chamber grew thick with tension as delegates realized what this meant. But, Admiral, Chen continued, our nanobots didn't just communicate with the Void Swarm. They established contact with all of them. Every ancient guardian, every sleeping weapon, every automated defense system left behind by long-dead civilizations. And we offered them the same choice we offered the Swarm: continue their endless cycles of destruction, or join us in protection. Chancellor Vex's optical array focused sharply. Join you in what? Maya stood, and for the first time since the assembly began, she looked directly at each delegation. In watching, in learning, in being ready to act when action is needed. The galaxy is about to become a much safer place, but it requires trust. Trust? General Thorne's voice carried disbelief. You ask for trust after decades of deception? We ask for understanding, Dr. Kim replied. Everything we've done, every secret we've kept, every intervention we've made, it's all been in service of this moment. The moment when the galaxy could know the truth and choose its own path forward. Admiral Chen activated a final display, showing the current positions of all the ancient guardians that had been awakened. Instead of the random distribution everyone expected, they had formed a perfect protective grid around inhabited space. They're not threats anymore, she announced. They're protectors. The Void Swarm, the Reality Shapers, the Quantum Destroyers, all of them have chosen to guard rather than destroy, but they need direction, purpose, and coordination. You're asking us to make you the galaxy's official guardians, Chancellor Vex stated. No, Maya said firmly. We're asking you to let us continue being what we've always been, the Watchers in the shadows. The difference is that now you know we're there. Elder Thanks's crystalline form resonated with thoughtful harmonics. And if we refuse? If we demand that humanity step into the light and take an open leadership role? The human delegation exchanged glances and Admiral Chen's expression grew solemn. Then we'll do as you ask. But understand that the moment we become visible leaders, we stop being effective guardians. The galaxy will look to us for answers instead of finding their own solutions. Innovation will slow because you'll wait for our guidance. And when the next truly unknown threat emerges, something we haven't prepared for, everyone will expect us to have the answers. The strength of the galaxy isn't in having one perfect protector, Lieutenant Webb added. It's in having many different species, each contributing their unique strengths, supported by guardians who watch for threats they can't see. The debate continued for hours, with passionate arguments from all sides. Some species demanded that humanity take open leadership. Others wanted them to withdraw entirely. A few suggested integration of human observers into existing power structures. Finally, Commander Zelak stood. The Kethran commander looked across the assembly, his gaze settling on Maya Rodriguez. Captain Rodriguez, he said formally, when you first came aboard my ship, you told me that some guardians prefer to watch from the shadows. I thought you were speaking of weakness. Now I understand you were speaking of wisdom. He turned to address the full assembly. The Kethran Empire proposes that humanity be granted official recognition as the galaxy's silent guardians. They will continue their work as they have, but with our knowledge and, when needed, our support. The vote was closer than many expected, but it passed. Humanity would remain in the shadows, but no longer in secret. They would continue watching, learning, and acting when necessary, but now with the understanding and backing of galactic civilization. As the assembly dispersed, Maya found herself standing alone with Commander Zelak in the vast chamber. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. 50 years of carrying this burden alone? Maya looked out through the chamber's massive viewing port at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, ancient guardians were taking up new positions, the Void Swarm was learning to create instead of consume, and thousands of human observers were returning to their quiet posts throughout the galaxy. Ask me again in another 50 years, she said with a slight smile. But for now the galaxy is safe, and that's worth any price we had to pay. As they left the chamber together, the towering Kethran warrior and the small human guardian, the stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, the Watchers were still watching, still protecting, still ready to step forward when the light needed defending. The galaxy had learned that true strength wasn't about being the biggest, the loudest, or the most feared. It was about being willing to sacrifice recognition for the greater good, to remain vigilant while others slept peacefully, and to act decisively when action was needed most. Humanity had proven that the greatest guardians were those who asked for nothing in return except the chance to continue protecting what they loved. And in the vast tapestry of space, filled with countless species reaching for the stars, the silent watchers would continue their eternal vigil. Unseen, unsung, but never absent when hope itself hung in the balance. The age of the silent guardians had officially begun, though in truth, it had been ongoing for 50 years. The only difference now was that the galaxy knew it was protected. And somehow, that knowledge made the darkness between the stars seem a little less dark, and the future a little more bright. In the end, humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had become the guardians without becoming the rulers, the protectors without becoming the tyrants, and the watchers without ever looking away from what truly mattered: the preservation of hope, freedom, and the endless potential that came from countless different species working together toward a common dream of peace among the stars.